what we're discussing today, it's in a very interesting theme, which is about umami and rancio. You can find in wines and, well, more specifically in port. So we would like to ask you, basically, how did you start about thinking about this, and if you can give us like an explanation also, what's umami, what's rancio, and what are your conclusions as well?
Cool. So it started out from talking about and thinking about umami, and umami's, it's this like Moorishness, this like this idea of like deliciousness in food that's related to finding amino acids called glutamates in high concentrations in food. And umami is a reasonably new arrival in the discourse of food and flavor, in that it kind of it was discovered post-war in Japan, and there was a chemist who was looking at food, trying to work out why his wife's soup always tasted so delicious. And basically he isolated glutamic acid and then fixed it with salt to create MSG. And then this became used and used. So it's more associated with Asian, like Japanese and Chinese food, than it is Western food. But glutamates and that umami Moorishness, we find it all across basically everything that's lovely. Parmesan cheese, ripe tomatoes. There's an absolute shit ton in salted cured anchovies. All of these things, those things that give you that real like delicious driver in the back of your palate, they're all rammed full of glutamates and umami. And so there was a school of thought a few years back, and it was principally led by a guy called J.K.G. Alt Lopez, who was adding little bits of diverse sources of umami to dishes to ramp up, to like kind of like turn the volume up on the umami. And we were playing around with this, and I kept starting to notice that these dishes were more umami than anything else. And that actually reminded me a little bit of a character I come across in wine, but quite exclusively in aged wines, in wines that have been aged really slowly, which is rancio. And it's one of those, again, it's not very well defined, but you kind of, a bit like you know it when you see it. And so when you look at really old tawny ports rammed full of rancio, when you look at really, really old sherries, dry sherries, they've got lots of this rancio in it. I think the term originally comes from cognac. And so these like 100-year-old cognacs, they talk about this rancio. And I assume it's related to rancid, but it's this slightly sour, salty, like dried fig, dried fruit, like dried nut character that predominates, and it's delicious. Like there's no two ways around it. But what reminded me of umami was that I was doing a tasting where someone gave me a couple of really old fortified wines, and I was like, I can't for the life of me tell whether this is a Madeira or a port, and I really ought to be able to, but there was just, I mean, they were like 60-year-old aged things, and all I was getting was lots and lots of aged character. And I was like, oh, this reminds me, the way that something delicious, if you get too much of it, you can just have the delicious. I'm not saying that I dislike really old ports because they're delicious, but it's something that it's really hard to get. Like you can only get, like I refer to it in my piece as decay done well. Like it's if anyone understands the chemistry, it's the Maillard reaction. So this really slow breakdown of sugars into proteins, really slow breakdown of proteins, and it just gives this wonderfully complex, rich array of flavors that you just can't get any other way. You can't shortcut it. Like, it has to be done in a barrel, slowly, somewhere where it works. Like, Villanova de Gaia, not in Porto. It has to be done well, or in a refrigerated cellar in Pinhal. But yeah, that's the new stuff. But
it's a magic, right? That happens in a cup. and the oxidation and the quality of the products, the oxidation,
Yeah.
the right environmental, temperature, humidity, everything has to be right, and
Exactly.
times many years. That's when we start getting this kind of flavor.
That's just like fascinating extra. But anyway, so because I'd always been reminded of it in Old 20 Ports, I emailed Tom Symington, your boss,
Yeah.
but via my rep first, and he actually phoned me up and was like, "Hey, are you an enologist?" And I was like, "Hey, I'm really sorry, I'm not." He was like, "Well, because they're really fascinated in this." And I thought, well, hang on, maybe there's a little bit more to this story than I'd originally thought. So I fell down a little bit of a deep dive into looking up exactly what's going on with umami, like glutamic acid in wine, and whether it turns up. And it is. And it transpires that people have looked at this, but not directly. Like, there's been quite a lot of study. People have looked at doing assays, so working out what concentrations of certain organic proteins you've got in wines and amino acids. But they were doing it as a way to try and give a chemical fingerprint of different wines. Because obviously, when at the really high end of wine, there's fakes. And people are looking at how to chemically say this wine is exactly this wine is exactly this. So they're looking at certain amino acids in wines and qualities to say, like, we can do a test and say this wine comes from here, this wine comes from here.
Yeah.
Transpires, that's really hard. But it does give us a list of a set of data where we can look at the amounts of certain amino acids in wine, one of which is glutamic acid. And because they were trying to use this as a thing where they were going to use like fingerprints of wines, they looked at lots of different wines, which is ideal.
Yeah, it's great.
And it transpires that glutamic acid levels, glutamic acid is what basically gives umami, correspond with ripeness. So Chardonnay, cool climate, Chardonnay, warm climate, definitely more in the warm climate. And then also the highest scoring wine for glutamates was a port. Now, I appreciate, and this annoyed me when I read it, it didn't specify what sort of port. Because we both know that port is a very broad house. But I was like, okay, this makes sense. There's a lot of, it's a warm region, it's a warm part of the world, so the grape's going to be ripe, you're obviously stopping early, but that ripeness will be there. And then your aging process is also a kind of, things are concentrated. You lose water because it's still a reasonably warm part of the world. So things are concentrated. It makes sense that this is going to get more and more and more concentrated.
Yeah.
There's also some evidence that the Maillard protein breakdown the Maillard processes can produce these type of proteins. I don't think anybody's yet said this will give this, but given the spread and complexity of products in this kind of aging, it would be no surprise if they turned up.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, hang on, I think it makes sense that these wines that give me this full-throated, like, palate woomph actually are high in glutamates. They're high in umami, and they taste that way. And then suddenly you think about the kind of foods that work really well with your, like, really old Rancio wines, and they're your high glutamate things. You serve like old tawny port with like some Chinese food, and it's wonderful, like surprisingly wonderful. The two just kind of gel together.
Yeah. That actually would have been my question as well. Is how would you pair basically this umami flavors and rancio flavors that you can get in wines, specifically in port, with certain kind of food? Would you look at enhancing this umami flavor from the food in the wine, or would you use it also the other way around, where you contrast something that doesn't have umami with the umami flavors from the wine?
I think with a lot of with the kind of ports where you've got a lot in, they're really intense experiences anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to give somebody a 30. I'm not going to say, here's your main course. Here's a 30-year-old like, you know, tawny port. It's too much. Like, I am a big drinker, and I would struggle at like 100 ml of something of port of that intensity. But 70 ml of that kind of port with a massive wedge of really good Parmesan cheese.
Yeah.
You know, two things that are really firing on the same kind of like wavelength, and you're going to be in heaven. You know, dried fig, big kind of umami character. You throw those with some nuts. It's often when you do this, like the classic pairings are the ones that just come out time and time again as being, oh, that's the thing that makes sense, and you're like, well, that's why it makes sense. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the 20 years old Tony port and Parmesan cheese has always been one of my favorite combinations. I just love it. I think the 20 years old, I agree with you. I mean, when you go to a certain age, they become really intense. And in a way, it's nearly a shame to pair them with food as well. You know, although you might produce a good combination, you might produce a very good experience, but at the same time, they are so complex. They're so nice on their own. I sometimes I recommend them as a digestive, but like dessert, a liquid dessert kind of thing experience. 20 years old, I believe it's maybe the limit.
Funny you say 20 years old, because that's my go-to as well, particularly with like your age statement 20, so not exactly 20, because I think when you look at tawny port, as it starts off young, you still get like the red fruit, and then it slowly drops away, and you see more of these rancio, and then it becomes something else. But I think at 20, you get this sweet spot where you've got loads of other characters, these like savory, like dried fruit notes, but you've still got red fruit. It's still there, but it's not all of it. And it hits all the different flavor beats for me. And it's all round. It's the tawny port I want to drink all the time. Is your 20-year-old.
I agree. That's what I'm gonna say.
Yeah. I served my tawny port in a beer can. You didn't send me any port. If you'd sent me port, I'd be totally drinking port.
We will send it next.
Next time.
Yeah. So I mean, it's really, really interesting, and because also I believe that often port it's not necessarily associated with savory food as well. You know, being a sweet drink, that some people believes that the normal association is with sweet food as well.
You realize I'm in England. We drink pork with cheese.
Yeah. Apart from cheese, I mean, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Cheese, it's one of the most common combinations. But apart from that, I mean, it's something that you don't see really even many restaurants to propose port with anything else rather than desserts or cheese. Do you do anything at your restaurant that it's more like different in that sense?
It's hard because one of the things about good port is that it has an intensity. Like, it is powerful, and that's what's great about it, but that's what makes it also difficult. Like, I can't give you a good port and be like, this is going to refresh your palate and you're going to drink this, you're going to like bang through half a bottle of it and you're going to feel fine, and then you want the next course. It has, by its very nature, an intensity that is somewhat domineering, and you've just kind of got to work with that. And I feel like it's you just relax into it and you say, look, we're going to focus on. So I've always thought with food and wine pairing, you can go in from one way or the other. You look at the wines, and you pair to the wines, or you pair to the food. And I don't feel there's an issue with this. If you're going somewhere and you're just about the food, you pair wines to back up and play behind and help with the food. If you're going to be drinking, the most amazing, if you've got a dinner of aged first grade Bordeaux, or you've got DRC on the menu, you don't use those wine. These are things you come across so rarely, as to you plan the food around the wine. And I think one of the problems with really fine port is that it's possibly not expensive enough, that it's just people use it. They're like, oh, I've got this, I'll have some port. And it's like, no, this is an amazing thing. This is an amazing thing of which like 25 years worth of long, slow effort's gone into it. Plus, it comes from an amazing place. And if you play with so in British food, we've got this thing called savouries that you'd have at the end of the meal. And it might be kind of like a dried fig wrapped in bacon, or these kind of dishes. They're little snacks, so to speak, but they really play up that savoury note at the end of the meal. And that's, if you're going to be drinking really good port, make the port the start. Like, bring food in that helps make that more exciting, and then suddenly you find that it's something you want to go to all the time, rather than you're like, okay, I've just had some port. It's that's what I try and do with tourneys, at least, is serve it with things that will play up the character of the tourney.
I mean, I believe that's especially if you want the wine to shine, it's a very good way of doing it. Sometimes maybe we are too concentrated in making something really complex in food, because we want to pair it, because the wine is also complex. So we end up having a clash of complexity, and neither the wine and the food really shines there. And that's and I think it's the other way around as well. I mean, if you have very complex food, maybe you have to keep it simple on the wine as well. I mean, it's about balancing, probably. But I think that the umami, it's an element that can make things more interesting as well. We don't talk about umami very often in wine specifically. In food, it's very normal. I mean, not that normal either in food, and it's also, I don't know, if I speak to people, most of people, also because of the name, will associate the umami also with Asian kind of food, while we are packed with umami flavors in a European food, like you mentioned, anchovies and tomatoes, and what's your opinion about that as well? I mean,
it's full of it. I mean, so one of my friends, Aaron Askoff, who writes Not Drinking Poison in Paris, has been doing a thing where he's been studying winemaking at Beaune Viticultural College, and he was sitting through a little lecture on food with some local sommelier, and they said umami is something that's associated with sushi. That's all where you'll find it. I thought,
yeah,
well, that's a very French view. It's the thing is, when you know what to look for, you see it everywhere. That salt cod stew that's with tomatoes that's been long, slow cooked down, that's gonna kick. That's gonna have so much moorishness. That's gonna be full of umami. And yeah, actually, it's probably gonna be all sorts of delicious with a slightly dry white port, which will probably be kicking with that with a few years. Like there's lots of ways and lots of places that we find this, and it's more about just noticing it and see, like, appreciating what's there. Just you could, if you took some really nice sourdough bread, sliced it thinly, got some really good aged cheese in there, like cooked down some onions, got a little kind of confit onion going on, sliced them in, like braised it, made yourself a little hard toasty, the kind of thing you find in a posh restaurant. That would be absolutely full of umami. You can serve that alongside a glass of properly aged vintage port, and you'd be in another world. Like, it's looking at those things and saying, this is where, this is what would work really well. Weirdly, I think barbecue. Like, if you go to American barbecue, if you get like that, like the burnt ends, like those really intense, like when the fat's melded in, it's all like Maillard. I reckon that would be amazing with proper vintage port. Can we do this? Can we do American barbecue and vintage port? Because now I'm excited. I want to do that. But when you start thinking about the kind of places where you get those flavors as being things that might work with vintage with port, it's suddenly like whole avenues open up, and it gets exciting.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's why I think that your findings are really, really interesting, because they open also different doors that we don't necessarily are thinking of, and I think this is something. Do you think this is going to be something that I mean, I know that from the producing wine point of view, we always look at things that they can add complexity and make our wines more special. So I guess the interest from the winemaking point of view on this kind of research is going to grow, and I think Tom Simenon is interested in that also. This reason, so we need to understand a little bit better how all of this works, because there's not probably enough study yet. But it's going to be maybe something that in the future is going to kick more. What do you think?
It's as with all things, the more we understand about stuff, the more we can play with it. And it may not be obvious. It may not be like immediately something that comes, people go, oh, this leads to this. But it'll be people working out different places where good port makes sense. And ideally, then we'll find new places where the two work together. But it's like all things. When you do research, you do research because you're interested in stuff, and things come about because of it. And that's why just learning about stuff is endlessly fascinating. You're not learning for a desired end goal. You're just why you research broadly, and then you find interesting things. And I think it'll come about. I think we'll see new places where port sits in conversation. We'll find new delicious ways to enjoy it. But also, very much myself, I get a greater appreciation of things I'm drinking when I understand what's there. And once I understand that multi-layered, multifaceted complexity better of things, I enjoy them more. And that's kind of what I love most.
Yeah. And from talking about yourself, obviously I was reading your article and you were mentioning the Graham's 1982, which were
almost as old as I am. Not quite.
So what do you enjoy drinking, particularly port? I mean, what kind of port? Tawny port, vintage port, ruby, all of them?
I love Tawny. I've like 20 to 30, and the 82 is about as old as I'll go, but it's delicious. It's just like Tawny port for me as an aperitif is just wonderful. I love it with cheese. I love it at the end of the meal as a kind of like take me down. I'm in there, and the way that it just sits on my palate and just kind of it carries on being interesting. I don't drink enough vintage port.
Why is that? I mean, is
how
that
much
because
can I drink? Honestly, I drink quite a lot as it is. No, I mean I have a few of them, but one of my good friends came for dinner last week and brought a bottle of 1970. It might have been Graham's. Well, it was 70 grand. And, you know, I opened a decanter of that for him, and it was just, it was glorious in that, like, silken power, alcohol, everything there was wonderful. I love port. I feel that port's one of those things where I like the way that the world of port has kind of contracted to being, in my mind, just the high-end, brilliant producers. You know, I absolutely don't miss basic Ruby. So I see, you know, yeah, the chefs can use it in their sauce and whatever. You know, there's no need for it. I also, it makes me ridiculously happy the way that the Douro has turned into a serious, like, grown-up fine wine region for still wines.
Yeah.
And I love the way that there's this understanding of exactly which vines and which grapes you want to do for which has, like, separated the region out. And I feel it's made port better and more focused and more fine, and, like, the still wines better and more fine. And
yeah,
it's not a drink I drink every day, mainly because I have to cycle to and from work, and frankly, but it's a wine I love.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it brings lots of enjoyment, especially if you understand it. And I believe, I don't know if you think so as well, it's price wise, it's a very, very good price for the product that you're getting. Like,
It's ridiculously well priced.
And I don't think sometimes people really understands the value that they are getting. Like we mentioned, the 20 years old. I mean, buying a bottle of 20 years old, it's so affordable, and it doesn't cost them much compared to,
like, you're looking at like 20 quid for like 500, or like 25 quid for a 500. It's ridiculous value.
I think it's one of the best value that you can get from drinks. I mean, from wine.
No, I would agree with that.
And even vintage ports. I mean, you can get some really old vintage ports. You know, if you compare it to, I don't know, to Bordeaux, for example, I mean, you know, you can pay a fraction of the price of, I'm not even saying the first growth Bordeaux, I'm talking about even lower levels, and you getting a fantastic bottle of port. They really,
or
really.
you could just buy a really good bottle of old port and then add it to, like, old Bordeaux to make the old Bordeaux better.
Yes.
Sorry, but I've actually done that. It works.
Well, it's a good trick. I like that.
I learned it from the Bordelais. That's what they used to do back in the day.
Back in the days, yes, it's true.
Back in the day. But no, I mean, yeah. Port's one of those. Port and the Douro holds a special place in my heart, and it's honestly one of the most beautiful wine regions, and the diversity of product that comes out of it. It's just, so many of them are so good, and that's what's annoying. It's like the still wines are great, like the vintage wines are great, the tawny wines are great. Like, there aren't many places that can conceivably come up with like 3 or 4 different categories, all of which they nail.
Yeah,
and that's something to be really proud of.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it's growing a lot as well, I think, and especially on the still wine side, because obviously the port production has been there for centuries, and I think from the still wine point of view, at the moment, Douro is already producing some world-class wines, but you know, we are only at the beginning, because this is something that's very recent. You know, I think in the next 20-30 years we can only improve even more, and so it's going to be a really in the future as well, the Douro is going to talk about a lot from both sides. Ports, because port was always going to be there, and also from the still wine point of view as well.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, we had such a great conversation. I mean, it's very technical as well. I mean, you can really get lost a little bit in details and starting to get more digging in and getting a lot of stuff that it starts getting quite complicated as well. And it's
absolutely, yeah,
straightforward as the name could indicate. It's actually quite scientific, and so it's quite a complex subject, but very, very, very interesting. And I'm very pleased that we had this chat. And I hope people that has been watching also, they find this really interesting. And you know, maybe we're gonna hear more and more talking about this Umami and Rancio.
I hope so too.
Don't know if there's anything else you want to add to this kind of conversation that we have.
Well, only that I'm going to have to come up with a menu, and I'm going to have to come and visit you in the Douro, and we're going to need to do some like quite rigorous scientific trials of which umami-based flavor dishes go best with like the Old Tawny. So I've got some ideas.
I like that idea. You know, we have. I mean, I get involved a little bit with the food pairing, and in one of the restaurants we have some port pairing. It's more like, you know, as you said, probably it's something that I will not do every day. Obviously, I will never have port every day on my table and having port with my meal. Yeah. But occasionally it can be something interesting to bring some diversity from the common brackets, you know, common life. You know, just going always with white wine with this, red wine with that.
Sometimes dining out should be about the spectacle. It should be wonderful. Like, you should go home and be like, I feel a little bit full. I'm a little bit drunk. This is good. That's what dining out should be. And like, port should be there for that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And I think it's from the restaurant point of view. I mean, you work in a restaurant that is already at a really, really high level, and you do these kind of things with also other products. But in a slightly lower level, I think it's something that can bring in more experience to the customers as well, to surprise with some combinations that they are unusual. And I think that's what the magic of port as well, that you can use it to surprise people in different ways. And I think that's something that makes port also very, very special.
No, absolutely. Also, I feel particularly with port, like a lot of people don't know what they just think port is what they last tried. So for a lot of people, port is LBV. It's not, and then you drop them like an Old Tawny or like, you know, properly aged vintage, and they're like, hang on, this is not what I thought port was. And you're like, port is many things.
Yeah, it's true, and it's our job and mission as a person that works for a producer and sells products, and from School of Port point of view, that's our mission, to let people understand the product better and to let them understand the diversity that you have within the word of port. Like you said at the beginning, you know, they made a test on one port. They just mentioned port. Also, sometimes you read recipes that they say, okay, so what do you need? A glass of port? Okay, yeah, but what port do I need for this recipe? I mean, if I'm using a ruby port or a tawny port, I'm going to have a completely different result. And so, you know, they don't specify what kind. And so there is still lots of work to do from our side to make port more understood. And hopefully this is going to, you know, happen, and School of Port will help achieve this. And hopefully people like you will help us also to...
I'm here to give all the assistance. I am definitely here to help.
Well, we need to invite you here first to come and visit us in Portugal and Andorra, so we can make this umami tasting,
Definitely.
and then we can all get advantage of that. Well,
I think there's legs in this as well.
yeah.
Cool. Right. I need to shoot.
Oh,
I've got dinner.
thank you
It's
very
been an
much.
absolute pleasure chatting with you.
My pleasure.
And actual proper thanks to Symington family for all of the delicious ports of theirs that I've drunk. And like it genuinely, it probably came out of like the number of times I've sat around at the end of the night with glasses of the old Tawneys that this came to be. And yeah, so it's your fault I'm here. So thank you.
Well, we are guilty, and it's this kind of guilt we accept it very, very well. And hopefully we're going to be even more guilty in the future in that sense. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It was a really pleasure, really interesting. And I hope even the people that are watching, they find this very interesting. And so, I hope to see you very soon. And as usual, all of you watching, also stay tuned to School of Ports for updates. We're going to bring other interesting subjects to talk about, and interesting people like Donald. And so please stay tuned and stay in touch. School of Ports, brought by our crazy guys here at Symington Family Estates. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for
Grazie.
us. Okay, thank you. Thank you.